season bow good? I've heard it is, actually.
It started with a simple act of kindness, a grilled cheese sandwich for a starving child shivering in the rain. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know that the bruises on his arms were the only clue to a war brewing in the city's underbelly. And I certainly didn't know that by opening my door to that boy, I was inviting the devil himself inside. His father wasn't just a concerned parent. He was Lorenzo Scarlatti, the man who owned half the politicians in Chicago and buried the other half. I wanted to save a child. Instead, I fell in love with a monster and became his only weakness. This is how I survived. The neon sign of the Rusty Spoon flickered with a dying buzz, casting a rhythmic, sickly pink light onto the wet pavement of Fifth Avenue. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of night where the rain didn't wash the city clean. It just made the grime slicker. Sarah Jenkins wiped down the counter for the third time, the smell of stale coffee and bleach stinging her nose. Her back ached. It was a specific kind of ache, the dull throb of a 28-year-old woman carrying the weight of a failing legacy. This diner had been her father's pride, then his burden, and now, 3 years after his funeral, it was her sinking ship. "2 customers all night, Clara," Sarah muttered to the empty room, tossing the rag into the sanitizer bucket. "At this rate, we're not paying the electric bill, let alone the supplier." She moved to lock the front door, her hand hovering over the deadbolt, when she saw movement in the alleyway across the street. It wasn't the usual movement, not the stray cats fighting over scraps or the staggering silhouette of Old Man Henry looking for a place to sleep off the whiskey. This was small, frantic. Sarah squinted through the rain-streaked glass. A boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. He was digging through the overflowing dumpster behind the bakery, his small hands tearing at a plastic bag. He wore a hoodie that was 3 sizes too big, the fabric soaked through and clinging to his frail frame. Sarah's heart hammered a rhythm of instinct against her ribs. This wasn't a safe neighborhood. Red Hook wasn't where you wanted to be after dark, especially if you were small and alone. She didn't think. She flipped the lock, the bell above the door chiming its cheerful, out-of-place ding-ding, and stepped out into the deluge. "Hey!" she called out, her voice struggling against the wind. The boy froze. He didn't run. He just went rigid, like a rabbit spotting a hawk. He turned slowly. Under the harsh street lamp, his face was a map of misery. Dirt smudged his cheeks, and his eyes, striking, piercing green eyes, were wide with terror. "I'm not going to hurt you," Sarah said, raising her hands, palms open. "You look hungry." The boy's gaze darted to the diner's warm glow, then back to the half-eaten bagel he'd pulled from the trash. He clutched it to his chest protectively. "That's garbage, honey. It'll make you sick," Sarah said, her voice dropping to that soft, steady tone she used to use on her dad when the dementia got bad. "I've got a griddle inside that's still hot. I can make you a burger, fries, a milkshake, chocolate." The mention of chocolate seemed to break the spell. The boy took a tentative step forward, then another. He looked left, then right, scanning the street with a paranoia that no child should possess. "Come on," Sarah urged, shivering as the rain soaked her waitress uniform. "It's on the house." He followed her in. Inside, under the fluorescent lights, he looked even worse. His sneakers were held together with duct tape. His hands were shaking. Sarah led him to booth 4, the one in the corner, furthest from the windows. It was the safe booth. "Sit. I'll be right back." She went into the kitchen and moved with practiced efficiency. She threw 2 patties on the grill, the sizzle filling the silence. She buttered a bun, dropped a basket of fries into the fryer, and mixed a thick chocolate shake. When she returned, the boy was sitting on his hands, staring at the table. He hadn't taken off his hood. She slid the plate in front of him. "Eat. Please." For a second, he hesitated. Then hunger won. He ate with a ferocity that broke Sarah's heart. He didn't chew. He inhaled. Grease dripped onto his chin, and he wiped it away with his sleeve. Sarah watched him, sipping her lukewarm coffee, giving him space. "What's your name?" she asked softly when he slowed down, halfway through the fries. He stopped chewing. His green eyes locked onto hers. He shook his head. "Okay, no name. That's fine," Sarah said. "I'm Sarah." He looked at the milkshake, then took a long sip. "Leo," he whispered. The voice was raspy, unused. "Nice to meet you, Leo. Where are your parents?" The temperature in the booth seemed to drop. Leo dropped his fry. His hands went under the table, gripping the edge of the seat. "Gone," he said. "Gone where?" "At work. Home." "Just gone." Sarah sighed internally. A runaway? Or worse, abandoned? She knew she should call child services. It was the law. It was the right thing to do. She looked at the phone behind the counter. Leo followed her gaze. He scrambled out of the booth instantly, panic flaring. "No calls, no cops! Whoa, easy!" Sarah stood up, blocking his path but keeping her distance. "Okay, no cops. I promise, no cops." He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. "If you call them, he will find me." "Who will find you?" "The bad man," Leo whispered. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't just a runaway. This kid was running from someone specific. "Okay, Leo, I believe you. No calls." She reached into her apron and pulled out a $20 bill and a few ones, her tips for the night. "Look, I can't let you stay here all night, because I have to lock up and go to my apartment upstairs, and I don't think you'd trust me enough to come with me. But take this." She tried to hand him the cash. He stared at the money, then looked at her with a maturity that was terrifying. "Keep it. You need it more." Sarah blinked, stunned. "Excuse me? The sign in the window says help wanted, but it's old. The neon O is broken. You're poor." Sarah let out a dry, incredulous laugh. "Kid, you have no idea. But I have a home. You don't." Leo didn't take the money. Instead, he reached into his oversized pocket and pulled out something small. He placed it on the table. It was a silver cufflink. Even under the diner lights, it gleamed with an expensive, heavy luster. It was engraved with a crest, a wolf with a sword in its jaws. "If I come back," Leo said, his voice trembling, "will you make the shake again?" "Any time, Leo. Any time." He turned and bolted out the door, the bell chiming behind him. He disappeared into the rainy dark before Sarah could stop him. Sarah walked to the table to clear the plate. She picked up the cufflink. It was heavy, solid silver, maybe platinum. She turned it over in her hand. A wolf with a sword. She didn't know it then, but she was holding the sigil of the Scarlatti crime family, and by feeding the boy, she had just placed herself in the center of the crosshairs. The next 3 days were a blur of anxiety. Every time the door chime rang, Sarah jumped, expecting either the police or the strange boy, Leo. Business was slow. Sarah spent most of Wednesday arguing with the meat supplier, a man named Tony, who had the personality of a wet sponge. "Cash on delivery, Sarah, no more credit," Tony had said, leaving 3 boxes of frozen patties on the counter. "I'm good for it, Tony. My dad did business with you for 20 years. Your dad is dead. Cash." She had emptied the register to pay him, leaving her with $12 in operating capital. By Thursday evening, the rain had stopped, replaced by a stifling humidity that made the city sweat. Sarah was behind the counter, refilling the sugar dispensers, when she felt eyes on her. It wasn't a customer. The diner was empty. She looked out the large front window. Across the street, idling in the no-parking zone, was a black Cadillac Escalade. Tinted windows, pristine paint job. It looked like a shark swimming in a pond of minnows. It had been there for an hour. "Great," Sarah muttered. "Health inspector? Or landlord's goons?" The bell chimed. Sarah snapped her head around. It was Leo. He looked worse than before. The hoodie was dirtier, and he was limping slightly on his left leg. But his eyes were focused. He walked straight to booth 4 and sat down. Sarah locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed, even though it was only 8 p.m. She pulled the blinds down on the front window, obscuring the view of the black SUV. She walked over to him with a glass of water. "I was worried about you." Leo drank the water in one gulp. "Can I have the burger?" "Coming right up." As she cooked, she watched him through the pass-through window. He was constantly checking the door, his leg bouncing nervously. When she brought the food out, she sat opposite him. "Leo, we need to talk. You're hurt. You're limping." "I fell," he mumbled, stuffing fries into his mouth. "Leo, that car across the street, the black one, is that for you?" Leo froze. The colour drained from his already pale face. He dropped the burger. "Black car? An SUV? It's been there for an hour." Leo scrambled to the edge of the booth, trying to peek through the blinds without being seen. He gasped. "They found me. I have to go." "No!" Sarah grabbed his wrist. His skin was burning hot. "You have a fever. You are not going out there. If they are bad men, you are safer in here." "You don't understand," Leo hissed, pulling away. "They burn things. They hurt people." "Who are they?" "Scarlatti." Leo whispered the name like a curse. Sarah frowned. The name sounded familiar, something from the news headlines she usually ignored. The Scarlatti family, organized crime, the kind of people who ran the unions and the docks. "Why do they want you, Leo?" "Because," a deep, gravelly voice spoke from the front of the diner. Sarah spun around, her hand instinctively grabbing the heavy glass ketchup bottle on the table. She hadn't heard the door open. She hadn't heard the bell. Standing in the entryway was a mountain of a man. He had to be 6'5", with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and a shaved head. He wore a dark suit that strained against his muscles. His nose had been broken at least twice. This wasn't the boss. This was the hammer. "The lock," Sarah stammered. "I locked the door." The man held up a small, specialized tool, a lockpick gun. He pocketed it and stepped into the light. Smart kid, hard to track. But everyone gets hungry. Leo was trembling violently behind Sarah. He grabbed the back of her uniform, burying his face in the fabric. Sarah stood up, positioning herself between the giant and the boy. Her heart was beating so hard she felt dizzy, but her father had raised her in this neighborhood. "You didn't show fear to bullies." "Get out," Sarah said, her voice shaking but loud. "We're closed," the man chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. "I'm not here for a burger, sweetheart. I'm here for the package." He pointed a sausage-like finger at Leo. "Come on, kid. Don wants to see you." "No!" Leo screamed. "I won't go back. He locked me in the basement." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Locked in the basement?" "He's not going anywhere with you," Sarah said, gripping the ketchup bottle tighter. "I'm calling the police." The man took another step. He was 10 feet away now. "You reach for a phone, and I break your hand. Then I break the kid's leg so he stops running. Then we leave. Make it easy on yourself." He reached into his jacket. Sarah didn't wait to see if it was a gun. She hurled the ketchup bottle with everything she had. It spiraled through the air and smashed into the man's forehead with a sickening thud. Glass shattered, and red ketchup exploded like blood. The giant stumbled back, roaring in surprise and pain, wiping the sauce from his eyes. "You bitch! Run, Leo! Back door!" Sarah screamed. She grabbed Leo's hand and dragged him towards the kitchen. They burst through the swinging doors. Sarah slammed the deadbolt on the kitchen door just as the giant threw his weight against it. The wood splintered. "The alley!" Sarah yelled. They ran past the sizzling grill, past the dishwasher, to the heavy metal door leading to the alley. Sarah kicked the crash bar. The door flew open, and they ran straight into a wall of wool and cologne. Sarah bounced off a hard chest and fell back onto the wet concrete of the alley. Leo gasped. Standing there, flanked by 2 more men holding umbrellas, was a man who looked nothing like the giant inside. He was tall, lean, and dressed in a suit that cost more than Sarah's diner, car, and apartment combined. He had salt and pepper hair styled perfectly, and a face that was devastatingly handsome, but hard as granite. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently burning with a cold fury. He looked down at Sarah, then at Leo, who was frozen in terror. The man didn't yell. He didn't pull a weapon. He simply adjusted his cufflinks that matched the one Leo had given Sarah. "Hello, Leonardo," the man said, his voice smooth like velvet over broken glass. Leo looked at the ground. "Hi, Papa." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The monster wasn't chasing the boy. The monster was his father. The giant from inside burst through the back door, his face covered in ketchup and blood, a gun in his hand. "I'm gonna kill her!" he roared, raising the weapon at Sarah. "Rocco!" the man in the suit barked. It was a single word, but it cracked like a whip. Rocco froze. The man in the suit, Lorenzo Scarlatti, looked at Rocco, then at the gun, then down at Sarah. He extended a hand to help her up. His grip was iron. "You threw a bottle at my head of security?" Lorenzo asked, a flicker of amusement dancing in his terrifying eyes. He broke into my diner," Sarah stammered, pulling her hand away. "He threatened a child." Lorenzo turned his gaze to Leo. "Is this true?" Leo nodded rapidly. "Rocco said he'd break my legs." Lorenzo's face darkened. The amusement vanished. He turned to Rocco. "I told you to retrieve my son, not damage him. Boss, the kid runs fast. I just meant bang." It happened so fast Sarah didn't even see the gun move. Lorenzo had drawn a pistol from his coat and shot Rocco in the kneecap. Sarah screamed, covering her ears. Rocco collapsed, howling in agony. Lorenzo holstered the weapon calmly, as if he had just checked the time. He looked at Sarah, who was trembling against the brick wall. "My apologies for the noise," Lorenzo said, "and for the mess in your diner. I am Lorenzo Scarlatti." He stepped closer, invading her personal space, smelling of rain and expensive tobacco. "It seems you have been feeding my son, which means I am in your debt." He reached out and tucked a strand of wet hair behind Sarah's ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline for a second too long, and a Scarlatti always pays his debts. The gunshot echoed in the alleyway long after the smoke cleared, bouncing off the wet brick walls like a thunderclap. Sarah stood frozen, her back pressed against the cold metal door of her diner, staring at the man writhing on the ground. Rocco, the giant who had threatened to break her hand just minutes ago, was now clutching his shattered knee, his face a mask of agony. But he wasn't screaming anymore. He was biting down on his own leather belt, stifling the noise, because his boss had told him to be quiet. Lorenzo Scarlatti didn't even look at the wounded man. His attention was entirely on Sarah and the boy clinging to her leg. "Leonardo," Lorenzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Come here. Now." Leo shook his head, burying his face deeper into Sarah's sodden apron. "No, you'll lock me up again." "I did that for your own good," Lorenzo snapped, a crack appearing in his icy demeanor. "Do you have any idea the chaos you've caused? Half the city is looking for you, and not just my men." "I don't care," Leo cried out. "I want to stay with Sarah. She makes me shakes. She doesn't have guards with guns." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, for the first time. He assessed her worn-out sneakers, the grease stain on her collar, the defiant tilt of her chin despite the terror in her eyes. "Miss Jenkins," Lorenzo said, stepping over the groaning Rocco to close the distance between them. "I appreciate your hospitality, truly. But this is not your world. Give me the boy." "He's scared of you," Sarah said. Her voice trembled, but she didn't move. "I don't care who you are. I'm not handing a terrified child over to a man who just shot his own employee." Lorenzo let out a sharp, frustrated breath. He checked his watch, a platinum piece that probably cost more than the diner's mortgage. "We are losing time. The Moretti family has scouts in this sector. If they see you with my son, you are dead. If they see you alone after tonight, you are dead." Sarah blinked. "What?" "You are a witness," Lorenzo stated cold facts. and you have aided the Scarlatti heir. To my enemies, that makes you a collaborator. To the police, that makes you a suspect. You cannot stay here tonight." "This is my home," Sarah argued, gesturing to the building. "My apartment is upstairs." "Your apartment is a fire hazard with a lock a child could pick," Lorenzo countered. He signaled to the two men holding umbrellas. They stepped forward instantly. "Grab the boy!" "No!" Leo shrieked. He grabbed Sarah's hand so hard his fingernails dug into her skin. "I won't go without her. Take her too. She comes or I scream. I'll scream so loud the cops have to come." The alley went silent. The threat was childish, but effective. Police sirens were the last thing Lorenzo needed right now. Lorenzo stared at his son, then at Sarah. A calculation was being run behind those dark, obsidian eyes. He looked at the diner, then back to Sarah. "Fine," Lorenzo said abruptly. "Fine what?" Sarah asked. "You're hired." "Excuse me?" "You obviously have a rapport with him. He's stubborn, like his mother was. He won't move unless you do." Lorenzo gestured toward the idling Escalade at the end of the alley. "Come with us. Pack a bag. You stay at the estate until the heat dies down. I'll pay you $5,000 a week." Sarah's mouth dropped open. "I can't just leave. I have a business to run." "You have no customers, Sarah," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I saw your ledger on the counter while I was waiting. You're 3 months behind on rent. You have $12 in the till. Come with me, and I'll pay off your debts. Stay here, and you'll likely be dealing with the Moretti hit squad by sunrise." He wasn't lying. She could see it in his eyes. There was no malice in the threat, just a brutal honesty. Sarah looked down at Leo. The boy looked up at her, his green eyes pleading. "Please don't leave me." She looked at her diner, the crumbling brick, the flickering light. Then she looked at the dark alley entrance, where shadows seemed to be moving. "I need 10 minutes to pack," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "You have 5, Lorenzo replied. He turned to his men. "Get Rocco in the van. Clean the blood off the pavement. Make it look like nothing happened." As Sarah rushed inside to grab her things, she realized she wasn't just leaving her home. She was walking away from her life and stepping into a cage with a tiger. The drive was silent and suffocating. Sarah sat in the back of the Escalade, the leather seats soft as butter. Leo had fallen asleep almost instantly, his head resting on her lap, exhausted by the adrenaline crash. Lorenzo sat opposite them, typing furiously on a phone, his face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. He didn't speak to her. He barely acknowledged her existence. Sarah stared out the tinted window as the city scenery changed. The grimy streets of Red Hook gave way to the highway, and then to the winding, tree-lined roads of the wealthy northern suburbs. They passed high iron gates and long driveways. Finally the car slowed. Massive wrought-iron gates, emblazoned with the same wolf and sword crest as the cufflink, swung open. The Scarlatti estate wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as a palace. It was a sprawling stone mansion with Gothic arches and towering windows, surrounded by manicured gardens that looked black in the moonlight. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with German shepherds. The car stopped under the portico. A butler, an older man with a kindly face, opened the door. "Master Lorenzo," the butler bowed. "We were worried." "Get the boy to bed, Alfred," Lorenzo said, stepping out and buttoning his suit jacket, "and get the doctor to look at his leg. He says he fell." Lorenzo didn't wait. He walked toward the massive oak front doors without looking back. Sarah gently woke Leo up. "Come on, sweetie. We're here." Leo rubbed his eyes, looking around groggily. When he saw the house, he stiffened. "I don't want to go in." "I'm with you," Sarah whispered, squeezing his hand. "I promise." Inside, the house was breathtakingly cold. The floors were marble, the ceilings 20 feet high. It smelled of lemon polish and emptiness. There were no family photos on the walls, only expensive oil paintings of landscapes and storms. Alfred, the butler, led Leo away to his room, assuring Sarah that he would be safe. Sarah wanted to follow, but a heavy hand landed on her shoulder. She turned to see Lorenzo. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing muscular forearms covered in faint scars. "My study," he commanded. "Now!" Sarah swallowed hard and followed him. The study was a room of dark wood and leather. Lorenzo walked behind his desk and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He slid one across the desk toward Sarah. "Drink, it's whiskey. It helps with the nerves." Sarah ignored the glass. "You shot a man tonight, Mr. Scarlatti. I don't think whiskey is going to fix my nerves." Lorenzo took a sip of his own drink, his eyes studying her over the rim. Rocco disobeyed a direct order. In my line of work, disobedience costs lives. He got off easy. "And Leo?" Sarah asked, her anger finally overriding her fear. "Does he get off easy too? He told me you locked him in a basement. He ran away from his own father. What kind of monster does that to a 7-year-old? Lorenzo slammed his glass down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "You judge what you do not understand," he growled, his voice dropping an octave. He grabbed a remote control from his desk and pointed it at the wall. A large, flat-screen TV flickered to life. It showed black and white security footage. "Watch," Lorenzo ordered. Sarah watched. The timestamp on the video was from 1 week ago. The scene showed a playground, a private one, likely in the backyard of this very estate. Leo was on a swing, laughing. A nanny was sitting on a bench nearby. Suddenly the screen flared white. An explosion. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. On the screen, smoke billowed. Part of the estate wall had been blown open. Men with assault rifles swarmed through the hole. The nanny was cut down instantly. Lorenzo's security team returned fire. It was a war zone. A bodyguard threw himself over Leo, shielding the boy with his body as bullets chewed up the grass around them. Lorenzo turned the TV off. The room plunged back into silence. "That was 7 days ago," Lorenzo said, his voice devoid of emotion, though his hand gripped the desk so hard his knuckles were white. "The Moretti family tried to kidnap him. They killed his nanny. They killed 3 of my men." Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding. I didn't know. "The basement Leo speaks of is a panic room," Lorenzo continued, pacing behind his desk. "Reinforced steel, independent air supply, satellite connection. It is the safest place on Earth. I put him there because I haven't slept in a week trying to hunt down the men who did this. I locked him in because I couldn't risk him wandering out." He stopped pacing and looked at Sarah. The mask of the ruthless Don slipped, just for a second, revealing a man who was exhausted and terrified of losing his son. "He thinks I'm punishing him," Lorenzo whispered. "He thinks I'm the villain. And maybe I am. I know how to run an empire, Sarah. I know how to break a man's will. I do not know how to talk to a 7-year-old boy who misses his mother." Sarah felt the anger drain out of her, replaced by a complex ache in her chest. She looked at the man, the killer, the kingpin, and saw the father beneath. "He doesn't need a panic room, Lorenzo," Sarah said softly, using his first name for the first time. "He needs you." Lorenzo looked at her, surprised by her boldness. "He is afraid of me, because you act like a soldier, not a dad. You bark orders. You shoot people in front of him." Sarah took a step closer to the desk. "You hired me to keep him safe? Fine. But I'm going to do it my way. No more locking him up. If he stays, I stay. And you stop terrifying him." Lorenzo stared at her for a long, heavy moment. The air between them crackled with a strange tension, part confrontation, part attraction. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, especially not by a diner waitress with flour under her fingernails. "You have a sharp tongue, Miss Jenkins," Lorenzo murmured. "It comes with the territory of serving cold coffee to bad tippers," she retorted. A faint ghost of a smile touched Lorenzo's lips. It transformed his face, making him look devastatingly human. "Very well," he said. "You have free rein with the boy. Alfred will show you to your room. It is next to Leo's." Sarah turned to leave. "And Sarah?" She stopped at the door. "Yes?" "The money I promised," Lorenzo said, his eyes dark again. "I'll double it. Just fix this. Fix him." "Because I can't." Sarah nodded and walked out into the silent hallway. She found her room. It was luxurious, with a 4-poster bed and silk sheets, but she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, looking out at the dark grounds where armed men patrolled with dogs. She thought she had saved a boy from hunger. Now she realized she was trying to save a boy from a war, and the general of that war, the man with the cold eyes and the warm hands, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because as she replayed the conversation in the study, she realized something that terrified her more than the guns. She wasn't afraid of Lorenzo Scarlatti anymore. She was intrigued by him, and in this house, curiosity didn't kill the cat, it got you involved. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, a sound startled her, a soft creak of the door handle. Sarah sat up, clutching the duvet. "Who's there?" The door pushed open. It wasn't an assassin. It was Leo. He was holding a pillow, looking small and fragile in the moonlight. "Sarah," he whispered. "I'm here, Leo." "Can I sleep in here? The shadows in my room? They look like the bad men." Sarah's heart broke. She pulled the covers back. "Come here." Leo climbed in, curling up beside her. He fell asleep instantly, safe. Sarah stroked his hair, staring at the door. She had stepped into the line of fire for this boy. She was the shield now. But she didn't know that inside the house, a different kind of threat was brewing. Down the hall, in the shadows of the West Wing, a woman watched Sarah's door close. She was beautiful, elegant, and her eyes were cold as ice. This was Isabella, the woman who had been trying to become Mrs. Scarlatti for 3 years. She had watched Lorenzo look at the waitress in the study. She had seen the spark. Isabella pulled out her phone and typed a message. "We have a problem. The stray dog has moved in. Remove her." Sarah Jenkins had survived the rain and the alley, but she had no idea that the real danger wasn't outside the gates. It was sleeping down the hall. The morning sun hit the marble floors of the Scarlatti kitchen, but for the first time in years, the room didn't feel like a mausoleum. It smelled like bacon, vanilla, and maple syrup. The estate's head chef, a man named Henri, who usually specialized in French reduction sauces, stood in the corner with his arms crossed, looking horrified. Sarah was at the massive industrial stove, flipping pancakes with a rhythm born of 10 years in a short-order diner. "Miss Jenkins," Henri sniffed, "Master Lorenzo prefers a light continental breakfast. Fruit, espresso, perhaps a poached egg." "Master Lorenzo is grumpy," Sarah countered, sliding a golden pancake onto a plate. "And Leo is a growing boy who needs carbs. Relax, Henry. I cleaned the griddle." "What is that smell?" The voice came from the doorway. Sarah froze, spatula in mid-air. Lorenzo stood there. He wasn't in a suit today. He wore dark jeans and a black cashmere sweater that hugged his broad shoulders. He looked less like a Mafia don and more like a model for a dangerous cologne ad. But the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. He hadn't slept. Leo was sitting at the island, swinging his legs. "Sarah made chocolate chip pancakes, Papa! Look!" Lorenzo stared at the plate, then at his son's syrup-covered grin. It had been months since he'd seen Leo smile like that. The tension in Lorenzo's shoulders dropped an inch. He walked over, eyeing the stack of food. "I usually eat fruit." "Live a little," Sarah said, daring to slide a plate toward him. "It's on the house." Lorenzo looked at her. The morning light caught the stray curls escaping her messy bun. For a moment, the kitchen went silent. He picked up a fork, took a bite, and chewed slowly. "Acceptable," he muttered. But he finished the whole plate. The domestic peace was shattered by the clicking of high heels. "Lorenzo? Darling, I heard you were up." A woman swept into the kitchen. She was stunning, tall, with raven hair that cascaded down her back like a silk waterfall, and wearing a white dress that looked expensive enough to feed Sarah's neighborhood for a year. She stopped when she saw Sarah. Her smile didn't falter, but the temperature in the room plummeted. "And who is this?" the woman asked, her voice light and airy, yet laced with venom. Lorenzo wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "Isabella, this is Sarah. She is looking after Leonardo." Isabella's eyes raked over Sarah's diner uniform, which she was still washing and wearing, because she refused to wear the stiff nanny uniform Alfred had offered. "Oh, the help. I see." She walked past Sarah, as if she were a piece of furniture, and placed a hand possessively on Lorenzo's arm. "I was worried about you, Enzo. The security breach. It's terrifying. I've increased the patrols around the guest wing." "Thank you, Isabella," Lorenzo said, though he gently removed her hand. "Sarah," Lorenzo said, turning back to her, "I have business in the city. Do not leave the house." "Actually," Sarah said, wiping her hands on a towel, "Leo and I were going to the stables. He told me he loves horses. The perimeter is secure, right?" Lorenzo hesitated. He looked at Leo's hopeful face. "Fine, but take Rocco's replacement with you, and don't leave the sight of the guards." As Lorenzo left, Isabella lingered. She turned to Sarah, her smile vanishing instantly. "He doesn't need a stray dog, sweetheart," Isabella hissed, her voice low so Leo wouldn't hear. "He needs a queen. Enjoy the pancakes. They'll be your last meal here if you aren't careful." She turned and clicked away. An hour later, Sarah and Leo were in the stables. The smell of hay and leather was comforting. Leo was brushing a gentle mare named Luna, while a new bodyguard, a silent man named Dante, stood by the door. "Can we ride, Sarah?" Leo asked. "Please? Just in the paddock?" "I don't know, Leo. Papa lets me. He has a saddle for me." Sarah sighed. "Okay. But just a walk." She found the small saddle Leo pointed to. It was beautiful leather, embossed with his initials. She hefted it up. Decades of working in a diner with broken equipment had made Sarah hyper-aware of things that weren't right. A loose screw on a table, a fraying wire on a toaster. As she went to tighten the girth strap, the belt that holds the saddle on the horse, her thumb brushed against the leather. It felt wrong. She leaned in closer. The leather strap had a clean, razor-thin slice halfway through it. It was on the underside, invisible unless you were looking for it. If Leo had climbed on, the strap would have snapped the moment the horse trotted. He would have been thrown under the hooves. Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't wear and tear. This was a cut. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Leo asked. Sarah dropped the saddle as if it were burning. She spun around to Dante, the bodyguard. "Don't let him touch that horse!" she screamed. Dante unholstered his weapon instantly, scanning for an attacker. "What is it?" "The saddle," Sarah breathed, her hands shaking. "Someone cut the strap. Someone tried to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Someone tried to kill the boy to get to me, or just to hurt Lorenzo. Isabella's words echoed in her mind. "If you aren't careful," Sarah grabbed Leo, pulling him into her arms. "We're going back to the room. Now." She realized then that the fortress walls couldn't protect them. The enemy was already inside the gates. The mood in the Scarlatti estate that evening was suffocating. Outside, a thunderstorm was rolling in, mirroring the turmoil inside. Lorenzo had returned early. When Dante told him about the saddle, the staff said the Don went into a room with the stablemaster, and the stablemaster didn't come out walking. Sarah was in Leo's room, reading him a story, but her mind was elsewhere. She had barricaded the door with a chair, much to Leo's confusion. A knock came. 3 sharp raps. "Sarah, it's Lorenzo." She moved the chair and opened the door. Lorenzo stood there, his face a mask of fury, but his eyes were filled with a terrifying darkness. He was holding a glass of whiskey, his knuckles white. "Is he asleep?" Lorenzo asked softly. "Yes. Come with me." He led her not to the study, but to the library, a massive 2-story room filled with books. He locked the heavy oak doors behind them. "I checked the saddle myself," Lorenzo said, his back to her. It was sabotage, expertly done. It was Isabella, Sarah said, her voice shaking. She threatened me this morning. She called me a stray dog. She said, I know. Lorenzo cut her off. He turned around. I know it was her. Sarah blinked. You know? Then why is she still walking around free? Because she is the daughter of the Calabrese family, our allies. If I touch her without absolute proof, I start a war that burns the whole city down. Lorenzo walked toward her, the energy radiating off him, making the air crackle. But she made a mistake. She targeted my son to get to you. He stopped inches from her. Sarah had to crane her neck to look up at him. He smelled of rain and gun oil. Why? Sarah whispered. Why does she hate me so much? I've been here 2 days. Because I look at you, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a rough growl. Sarah's breath hitched. What? I look at you, Sarah. And she sees it. Everyone sees it. He raised a hand, his rough thumb tracing the line of her jaw. You walked into my life, out of the rain, fearless and foolish, and you made my son smile. You challenged me in my own house. His hand moved to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. You are dangerous to me, he murmured, because you make me want to be something other than a monster. The air between them was electric. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She should pull away. He was a criminal, a killer. But looking into his eyes, she didn't see the Don. She saw the lonely man who had been living in a cold war for years. Lorenzo, she breathed. He leaned in. His lips were inches from hers. She could feel his heat. Click. The sound was loud in the quiet library. It wasn't the door. It was the sound of the entire estate's power grid shutting down. The lights died. The library plunged into pitch blackness. Stay down! Lorenzo roared. He tackled Sarah, driving her to the floor behind a heavy leather sofa just as the glass of the French doors shattered inward. Crash! Gunfire erupted. Red muzzle flashes lit up the room like strobe lights. Bullets tore into the books above their heads, sending paper flying like confetti. Stay here! Lorenzo commanded. He pulled a gun from his waistband. Sarah hadn't even seen it there, and rose to a crouch. He fired 2 shots into the darkness. A scream followed. Leo! Sarah gasped, scrambling to get up. I have to get to Leo! No, my men guard his door. Lorenzo fired again. This is a hit, a full assault. How did they get in? Sarah screamed over the noise of shattering glass. The gates, the guards. Someone disabled the security system, Lorenzo gritted out, reloading with practiced speed. Someone on the inside. Isabella. The realization hit them both at the same time. Isabella hadn't just cut a saddle strap. She had opened the gates to hell. The library doors burst open. Flashlights cut through the gloom. Men in tactical gear with the Moretti crest on their chests poured in. Lorenzo was a one-man army. He moved with lethal precision, shooting the first man in the throat and the second in the chest. But there were too many. Run, Sarah. The servants' passage behind the bookcase. Go to Leo, Lorenzo yelled, providing cover fire. Sarah didn't argue. She scrambled on her hands and knees towards the false bookcase Lorenzo had pointed out. She pushed the hidden latch, and it swung open into a dark, narrow corridor. She looked back. Lorenzo was pinned down behind the desk, bullets chipping away the wood. He looked at her one last time, a look of desperate, fierce protection. Go! Sarah scrambled into the dark passage, and the bookcase clicked shut, muffling the sounds of the gunfight. She ran through the cobwebs and dust, guided only by her memory of the house layout. The passage opened out into the hallway on the 2nd floor. It was chaos. The emergency lights flickered red. Smoke filled the air. She saw bodies, guards, on the floor. She sprinted toward Leo's room. The door was open. Sarah's heart stopped. Leo! She burst into the room. It was empty. The bed was unmade. The window was open. Looking for this? Sarah spun around. Standing at the end of the hall was Isabella. She held a silver pistol in one hand, and with the other, She gripped Leo by the back of his pajamas. The boy was crying, his mouth duct-taped shut. Isabella smiled, and it was the smile of a demon. "The Morettis want the king," Isabella said, raising the gun toward Sarah's chest. "But I think taking the prince and the pawn will hurt him so much more." Sarah stood alone in the hallway, unarmed, panting, staring down the barrel of the gun. Lorenzo was trapped downstairs. The guards were dead. It was just the waitress against the heiress. Sarah looked at the gun, then at Leo's terrified eyes. A strange calm washed over her. She remembered the ketchup bottle. She remembered the alley. She wasn't a soldier. She was a survivor. "Let him go, Isabella," Sarah said, stepping forward. "One more step and I paint the walls with you," Isabella warned, cocking the hammer. Sarah took the step. The hallway was bathed in the strobe light flicker of the emergency alarms. Red, black, red, black. "You think you're brave," Isabella sneered, her finger tightening on the trigger. "But you're just stupid. You're a waitress. You serve people. You don't save them." Sarah didn't look at the gun. She looked at Leo. The boy was trembling, his eyes wide with panic, but he was looking at Sarah with absolute trust. "You're right," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I am a waitress, and you know what you learn waiting tables in Red Hook?" Isabella frowned, confused by the lack of begging. "What?" "You learn how to deal with customers who refuse to leave." Sarah didn't lunge for the gun. That would be suicide. Instead, she lunged for the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall to her right. In one fluid motion, practiced from years of dodging grabby hands and spilled drinks, she ripped the heavy red canister off the hook and hurled it. Not at Isabella, but at the crystal chandelier hanging directly above Isabella's head. Clang! The heavy steel canister smashed into the delicate crystal fixture. The chain, already weakened by stray bullets from the floor below, snapped. Isabella looked up. It was the last mistake she made. The chandelier crashed down. It didn't crush her, but the explosion of glass and metal knocked her sideways, sending the gun skittering across the floor. She screamed, falling into a pile of shattered crystal. Leo scrambled away, ripping the tape off his mouth. "Sarah, get back!" Sarah yelled. Isabella was already scrambling up. Her face was cut, blood streaming down her white dress. She looked deranged. She saw the gun 5 feet away. She dove for it. Sarah didn't have a weapon. She had her body. She threw herself at Isabella, tackling the other woman just as her fingers brushed the pistol. They crashed into the wall. This wasn't a choreographed movie fight. It was ugly. It was nails and teeth and desperation. Isabella was trained in self-defense, but Sarah was fighting for a child. Isabella drove a knee into Sarah's ribs. Sarah gasped, air leaving her lungs, but she grabbed Isabella's hair and slammed her head against the floorboards. Isabella shrieked and rolled, pinning Sarah down. Her hands went to Sarah's throat. "Die! Just die!" The world started to go black at the edges of Sarah's vision. She clawed at Isabella's wrists, but the grip was iron. Then a small shadow moved. "Leave her alone!" Leo, holding a heavy marble statue from the hallway table, swung it with all his might. Thwack! He hit Isabella squarely in the shoulder. It wasn't enough to knock her out, but it broke her grip. She howled in pain, turning to backhand the child. "No!" Sarah roared. The rush of oxygen hit her blood. Sarah bucked her hips, throwing Isabella off. She scrambled on top of the heiress, grabbed the gun from the floor, and leveled it. She didn't know how to shoot. Her hands were shaking. But she pointed the barrel right at Isabella's chest. "Don't move!" Sarah panted, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead. "I swear to God, don't move." Isabella froze. She looked at the gun, then at Sarah's eyes. She saw something there that terrified her. It wasn't the fear of a victim. It was the rage of a mother protecting her young. "Sarah?" The voice came from the stairs. Lorenzo Scarlatti stood there. He was covered in drywall dust, his shirt torn, a smear of blood on his cheek. He held a submachine gun, and behind him stood Dante and 3 other surviving guards. Lorenzo looked at the scene. The shattered chandelier, the unconscious Moretti hitmen in the hall. his son holding a marble statue, and the waitress from Red Hook holding a gun on the traitor. He walked over slowly. He gently placed his hand over Sarah's hand on the gun. "I've got it," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You can let go, Sarah. I've got it." Sarah's adrenaline crashed. She slumped, the gun falling from her hand. Lorenzo kicked it away and signaled his men. "Take her," Lorenzo ordered, pointing at Isabella. His voice was cold as the grave. "To the basement. We have much to discuss regarding loyalty." Isabella didn't scream as they dragged her away. She just stared at Lorenzo, knowing her fate was sealed. Lorenzo dropped to his knees. He didn't check on his empire. He pulled Leo and Sarah into a crushing embrace. Leo buried his face in his father's chest, sobbing, "Sarah saved me, Papa." She dropped the ceiling on her. Lorenzo looked at Sarah over his son's head. His eyes were dark pools of intensity. He reached out and wiped the blood from her forehead with his thumb. "I told you to run," he said. "I don't leave good tippers." Sarah managed a weak smile. Lorenzo didn't smile. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss of possession, of relief, of a promise made in blood. It tasted of smoke and survival. "You are not a waitress anymore," Lorenzo whispered against her lips. "You are mine." The neon sign of the rusty spoon was gone. In its place was a tasteful, hand-painted wooden sign that read, "The Scarlatti Kitchen." The interior had been renovated. The grease stains were gone, replaced by polished mahogany and warm lighting. But the heart was the same. Sarah stood behind the counter, but she wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a silk blouse and diamond earrings that caught the light, a gift from her husband. The bell chimed. "Closed for a private event," Sarah called out cheerfully. "I have a reservation," a deep voice replied. Lorenzo walked in. He looked different. The weight of the world was still on his shoulders. Being the boss of Chicago wasn't a part-time job, but the shadows in his eyes were gone. He walked behind the counter and kissed her, ignoring the gasp of the line cook. "Where is he?" Lorenzo asked. "Booth 4. Doing his homework." Lorenzo looked over. Leo was sitting in the corner booth, chewing on a pencil, looking healthy and happy. There were no dark circles, no flinching. "The Moretti family formally surrendered the territories this morning," Lorenzo said, resting his hand on Sarah's waist. "It is finished. The war is over." "For now," Sarah corrected him gently. She knew this life. She knew there would always be another war, but she also knew she wasn't fighting it alone anymore. She reached under the counter and pulled out a plate. Grilled cheese, extra crispy. Lorenzo laughed. A rich, genuine sound that he had relearned how to make. "You're trying to fatten me up." "I'm keeping you fed, Mr. Scarlatti. A hungry man is a dangerous man." "I am still dangerous," Lorenzo murmured, leaning in close, "but only to those who threaten what is mine." He took a bite of the sandwich, right there in the diner where it all began. Outside, the rain began to fall on the city streets, washing away the grime. But inside, it was warm. Sarah watched her boys, the wolf and the cub. She had let a hungry boy into her diner and found a family. She had stared down the devil and made him fall in love. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the Queen of Red Hook, and long live the Queen. Wow, what a journey. From a simple grilled cheese sandwich in a rainy diner to a showdown in a Mafia mansion. Sarah proved that you don't need a weapon to be strong. Sometimes, all you need is the courage to open the door. Lorenzo Scarlatti might have ruled the city with fear, but Sarah conquered him with kindness. It just goes to show that even in the darkest worlds, a little bit of light can change everything. I hope you guys enjoyed this roller coaster of emotions. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. We have a thriller coming up next week. involving a runaway bride and a secret agent that you do not want to miss. What was your favorite part? The ketchup bottle scene or the chandelier drop? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay safe and be careful who you let in from the rain.